The alleged Evan Smith physical assault at the hands of Fort Judy resident Donald Kavanagh reached fever pitch last week, with charges being filed against one of the alleged perpetrators. Attorneys for the Smiths and the Kavanaghs made dueling public appearances in local and diaspora media last week, leading some to suggest that a trial was being held in the court of public opinion.
And receipt of the completed medical form and a review of statements and interviews of eyewitnesses, the police has since arrested and charged two persons, Sarah Hutton and Donald Kavanagh, have been arrested.
Over in Trinidad and Tobago, protests and civil unrest erupted in the Movar area following the police-involved shooting of Noel Diamond, Joel Jacobs, and Israel Clinton. Residents of the underserved community blocked roads in the adjoining thoroughfares, burned tires and other debris, with some comparing the deaths of the three men to the extrajudicial murder of George Floyd in the United States.
40 different places simultaneously, events were taking place, burning tires, debris, damaging property, shooting at police officers in different parts of Trinidad and Tobago.
These two incidents, while different in nature, spurned similar responses in the form of protests, online and offline activism, and fierce debates around issues of race and class on both islands, due process rights, and social justice. Over in Antigua and Barbuda, its Prime Minister Gaston Brown is not throwing in the towel as yet on the survival of Liat, as he is moving to establish a new operation to be called Liat 2020 Limited, in spite of the fact that shareholder governments voted to liquidate the airline. Here to discuss these issues are former TAU President Chester Humphrey, attorney Ruggles Ferguson, clinician Augustine Panchu, activist Cassandra Mitchell, and Joanna Ray Reyes. Today, Venezuela celebrates its 200th year as an independent nation after declaring themselves free from Spain in 1811. Thanks for joining us for another edition of the Bub Report.
A pleasant good morning to everyone, and welcome to another Sunday edition of the Bub Report. It's Sunday, July 5th, and we have a packed show for our audience this morning. But before we get to our guests, we want to update you on some breaking news developments that are coming out of Guelph in St. John's. Pineapple Media and Mikey Hutchinson are reporting that there was a police-involved shooting this morning that left resident Jamal Charles nursing gunshot wounds after being allegedly shot by a police officer attached to the Guelph police station. Charles, we understand, is a national football player and is actively involved in other sporting activities in his community. We learned from social media postings that there is protest activity on the lands and in front of the Guelph police station specifically. Residents also blocked the main road in that town, making vehicular traffic impassable. This is a developing story. We actually also reached out to Superintendent Vanny Cohen of the Community Relations Department of the Royal Grenada Police Force to get their side of the story. And he indicated that he has to conduct, quote, an assessment first of the conditions in Guelph before making any public media pronouncements, unquote. We will segue into welcoming our first guest, and he is the current president of the Grenada Senate, and he was also the former president of the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. Senator Chester Humphrey, good morning and welcome to you.
Hi, good morning, Kellen, and good morning to all the listeners to your program.
Yes. Senator Chester Humphrey, first off, can you reflect on the legacy of Liat as a regional airline? 2 weeks ago, regional shareholder governments voted to liquidate the operation. Was this the right move?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. Liat is indeed a Caribbean institution. It has had its ups and downs. It has faced many a difficulty. In fact, when I became chairman of the Liat group of unions, it was precisely at a time when Liat had faced its most difficult financial moment, and the collapse of the airline was imminent. And the unions summoned a meeting in Antigua, to which all attended, and the decision then was whether or not the region-wide strike should be effected, simply because Liat was unable for over a month to pay wages and salaries. I was the only dissenting voice in those deliberations. Everybody else wanted to go on strike. I counseled against it, and that the strike would gain nothing but close the airline down. And then at that time, there were probably about 1,400 employees throughout the region would lose their jobs. So this is not the first time Liat has faced this, but of course, COVID is a different spin, and comes at a time when there were successive shocks within the region, and this has made it difficult to survive. It's unimaginable that a modern economy made up of island states can expect to function, and more so to integrate, without interconnecting regional travel. So I hear the decisions taken by the shareholders. That decision may have been influenced purely by the harsh realities of today's economic situation, which in fact is really challenging. And I don't think there's anyone alive who could recall or have the experience of the kind of challenge that we face now in the region. Nonetheless, as a regional institution, I think we should do everything possible to give Liat, reorganized, of course, another lease on life. And that's my personal view.
Back in 2011, however, you said in that previous Liat dispute, you said, quote, survivability of the airline has always been a central question anytime you talk about Liat. And it's even more so now, given the very financial and economic situation that we face within the region, unquote. Now, Liat seems to have always had these financial issues, right? So
That's simply because from its
We have
inception,
to continue reinventing the wheel.
no. Well, it's not a question of reinventing the wheel. That is simply because from inception, Liat was always undercapitalized. So there was always a insufficiency of capital. The biggest injection of funds into Liat has been recent when it had to refleet. The dash rates had come to the end of their useful life. And let me say, we could say many negative things about Liat, but one of Liat's greatest achievements, which is unchallengeable, and which puts Liat amongst the safest airline in the world, is that Liat has never had a serious flight catastrophe. Liat's safety record is impeccable and it's among the best in the world. So, notwithstanding all of its different problems, you will probably book a flight and arrive late, or you may not arrive at all. But certainly, once you board that aircraft, you'll arrive safely. And I think that speaks to, first of all, the degree of training and skills of the body of Liat pilots. Liat has served the region well, it's a household name. And to every Caribbean person, the demise of Liat, if it is now final, will be a heartbreaking event. And for someone like myself who has been very intimately engaged in it, is even more so. I have built up an army of friends and colleagues, many of who are still working with Liat, who are now, in some cases, after 37 years of work with the airline, 37 years of service, are now going to go home without a cent in any kind of termination compensation, since the airline is just insolvent, it doesn't have the funds. The aircraft that it has doesn't belong to it. Some of those aircrafts belong to the Caribbean Development Bank. Others are leased aircraft, and it doesn't have any kind of existing capital that it can um, and then sell to then get the necessary cash to pay the compensation. So it is not just the closure of an airline, but it will represent the closure of an institution and all the socio-economic difficulties which go with it. So it's not about discovering the wheel, it's about the fact that we treated Liat not with a degree of respect. First and foremost, Liat is our mass transit, just like you have the New York mass transit, the London transit. It is our transit of connecting these islands. And I am not aware that there's any mass transit system anywhere in the world that is not subsidized by the state to an extent to make it affordable that people can travel back and forth. So Liat has never really turned any significant profits, and I give you the reason why. It's a combination of both subjective and objective factors. But I think in the last 10 years, Liat has done much to improve on its management, etc., to improve on its accountability and so on. I think it had a board of directors that was very knowledgeable about regional air travel and so on. The shareholder governments pumped a significant amount of money in it. But Liat has always been required to fly on profitable routes, and it has served the region. But while we were willing and pumped huge amount of money into the transatlantic flights and other flights coming from North America and so on, these air companies were able to be paid huge amount of money for empty seats. Liat never was a beneficiary of that kind of consideration. So
Okay.
here you had.
Yes, Senator, thank you for that. This brings me to the question of the future of trade unionism in Grenada. Well, not in Grenada, I'm sorry, but in the aviation sector. With more smaller airlines coming on stream to ostensibly fill that void that Liat may leave, do you think that a lot of these private airline owners would have the appetite for workers to be unionized?
Well, first and foremost, these are small companies. I don't know. I am not satisfied from all that I've heard that a plethora of small air services can fill that void. It means that the state is recoiling from a fundamental infrastructural facility. Could you imagine if the state just recoiled from building roads and maintaining them? and left it to in private individuals to build roads and to charge tolls. I mean, what kind of confused economic situation that would be?
Well,
The
Senator,
state, especially these states in small island economies, have a very fundamental role, a pivotal role. We can't exclusively function in a free market economy.
but
Even the great United States hasn't.
I would interrupt you here. You are
So let me come back. Let me connect that to the question that you asked about the issue of trade unions. Well,
yes.
in most of the territories, the right to join a trade union is enshrined in law. The question is whether or not these small airline services would attract um, workers who in a situation where you have high unemployment. In other words, while you are free to join a trade union of your choice, but certainly if you are coming into a situation where you're fearful of loss of your jobs, and all of the airlines that function in this region are very marginal in terms of the return on equity investment, all of them. And indeed, one would say that the worldwide industry of airlines, they're not profitable. Air India is about to fold up. Several airlines in the United States have done. Many in Europe have collapsed. And the history of inter-island air service is not a very proud one. Almost, you had dozens of private sector airlines coming on stream. None of them has survived as long as Liat, and there's a very simple reason for that, because none of them have the treasuries that Liat has had by the 4 or 5 shareholder governments that were able to keep them afloat. And therefore, that economic reality hasn't changed. So I don't know what guarantees we can have in believing that the private sector in the Caribbean will be able to provide a sustainable, low cost inter-island air service. I have not seen that evidence at all.
Okay. All right, Senator Humphrey. Thank you so much. Now, finally, before I go, let me thank you for appearing on the stream today. Now, in the days following George Grant's passing, I know that he was your neighbor and you made regular appearances on his program. You declined citing other engagements, and I can understand that. Briefly, do you want to reflect on the passing of your old friend and neighbor? I don't think I got.
Well,
from you.
George came at a time when there was a need for a void. There was a void and a need for a voice like George. I was one of the very first persons that George interviewed, and I was a regular item on his Sunday agenda, and that went on over the years. I think that Grenada would have missed, by virtue of George's passing, Grenada definitely would miss a serious journalist, someone who gave a voice to many persons. He had an alternative view and an alternative voice, and in any fledgling democracy, that's always welcome. It's
Especially
good
now,
for
Senator,
equality.
we have an almost one-party configuration in the parliament. We certainly need the fourth estate to stand up. But Senator Humphrey, thank you so much for appearing. I certainly trust that you would be appearing on my program in the future.
Well, call me at any time. I mean, once I don't, I'm heading now to the anniversary of the Bolivarian Republic. It's a significant day for them, and it's a significant night for every patriot in the region, given the challenges that they face and their attempts to change government by fiat from outside of the geographic confines of the state itself. Venezuela is a very dear friend of Grenada. The Bolivarian experiment is a very dear friend of the people of the Caribbean, I may say, and Grenada in particularly. For many years, they financed the school feeding program, and many other significant projects. The new wing we're building in the hospital has been built with the solidarity of the people and government of Venezuela, and many other things, the PetroCaribe program and all that entails. So I am making my way there. So once again, thanks for the opportunity although I thought it may have been a little bit more extended so that we could have gotten into the thing in depth. But just let me end on this point.
There would be an extended discussion on Liat, and I am committing to ensuring that that gets done, because I want to incorporate the pilots, the unions all over the region, and things like that. Senator Humphrey, unfortunately, we are out of time, but we will be in touch, and I will have you back, in short order. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
All right. Bye.
Viewers, we will take a break. Let's just watch the headlines for the week.
There is an issue that we have in relation to persons who come from outside, who have a different skin color, who come and reside in these residential areas and occupy leading spots in this country. And they try to treat our citizens as second-class citizens. They try to prevent persons from going to the beach, put up chain. I am dealing with an issue now in relation to a gate in Lansepine. I have dealt with an issue in the past with someone of a different skin color pushed an employee down in a swimming pool. I have seen on the court list a gentleman with a different skin color assaulted, I don't remember what the criminal charge was, a minister in government.
That the family of Mr. Kavanaugh beat up on anybody, there is absolutely no truth to that. And that if there was any sort of racial statements and slurs, it did not come from the Kavanaugh family. It came from elsewhere. Now, this incident has caused a lot of pain, a lot of heartache to the family. They have been threatened publicly through different social medias. They have been attacked through their business Facebook and elsewhere. There have been protest action without persons stopping and thinking or trying to find out what is the fact. And one understands.
And welcome back to the stream. Happy am I to introduce our panelists for this morning's discussion. We have Joanna Ray Reyes, who is based in Trinidad and Tobago, who were involved in some protest action there with some of the uprisings that we witnessed there within the last week. We also have activist Sandra Mitchell, who's coming to us from St. David's in Grenada, Pomeroy's to be precise, I believe. And we have attorney Ruggles Ferguson. And panelists, welcome.
Greetings, greetings.
All right. Now, Joanna, I'll begin with you. Over there in Trinidad, we witnessed scenes of civil disturbance in some Port-of-Spain neighborhoods. Commissioner Gary Griffith and National Security Minister Stuart Young suggested that these disturbances were an orchestrated attempt at causing widespread civil unrest. What did Griffith and Young get wrong?
I think what they got wrong was basically their framing of the of what is happening, and I don't think it was by chance or an accident. I think it's an intentional framing of what is the people's uprising of this country against state sanctioned violence, against systemic violence in terms of the socioeconomic sector, and they are framing it in a way that allows them to continue as they are going, to continue with the status quo, and I believe is very intentional framing of the narrative. I think the media, unfortunately, has been accomplice in that, using words like mayhem, chaos, when the visuals present persons that are protesting, they're blocking roads, and then they're chanting for justice.
Now, Ruggles, I will get to you. Now, the protest over in Grenada prompted a lot of discussion on narratives, or competing narratives in some quarters, that due process is not properly executed for certain segments of the Grenadian population. And that comes down to issues of socioeconomics and race and class. Would you agree with that assertion?
Well, in certain instances, you will find that happening in society. How prevalent it is, I'm not too sure whether or not you can make a broad statement in the Grenada context. There will be certainly isolated examples that one can refer to. Of course, due process encompasses certain legal entitlements that one who is arrested and charged, in particular for an offense, should experience in relation to the particular matter. Well, I've just seen the two clips from Mr. Sylvester and Mr. Gill, of course, and what you have immediately is you have two versions, different versions as to what may have happened. I think the whole issue has very important lessons for us, because as I understand it, the whole thing started based on an understanding, and whether it's a understanding or misunderstanding, but there was a representation that after a particular incident in one of the neighborhoods in Fort Judy, that the police, after they intervened and there was obvious harm caused to an individual, indicated to the family that it was a private matter and that they should deal with it. I think that's the origin of this issue. Had it been dealt with, then we may never have heard about it at all as a national or international issue. So the victim, and in this case, the victim's wife, speaks out and she says, listen, I feel a sense of injustice because here it is, my husband is beaten up and I am told that it is a private matter. Indignantly, she asks, how can it be a private matter? So that's what, so it starts from that angle. And then now you have, in the context of all that is taking place in the world and in particular in the United States, the person on the other side, the aggressor, it is said, is a white man. And therefore you have this immediate reaction. Now the question is, and I have not really heard expressly from the police in terms of whether or not that understanding or that statement was made. But I can tell you, if it was made, then I would be surprised, because it's definitely not a private issue. Based on all the different stories you are hearing, then one side is saying, listen, the lady misunderstood what was said. So immediately two issues arise there. The issue of communication and how police officers communicate, especially when you're dealing with very sensitive issues, as this obviously is a sensitive issue, based on where the individual, where the incident happened, one in Fort Judy, a sort of reserved neighborhood, and then the person is white. So immediately these two issues arise. However, what I want to guard against is that because of the emotions involved, and of course, if the police officer told the lady that, then that was wrong. However, what we have to guard against is just based on statements made, and then we come to conclusions. Was the incident, for example, even though it involved persons of different skin color, Was the incident racially motivated? Yeah, right, that's an issue. And of course, if it was racially motivated, then you would understand the issue of protest and so. However, and that's the important point I wish to make out of all of this, our system of law is an adversarial system, meaning, you know, you have the inquisitorial system, like in the Netherlands and some of these places, and you have the adversarial system. Our system is the adversarial system. And in that adversarial system, the police has its role to play, and the police department and lawyers, prosecution has its role to play, defense counsel has its role to play. And if there is an incident like that, then the first thing, so like people say, why the police didn't arrest these people? They go down there, there's an obvious incident. Why they didn't arrest people? But the police, unless there is an incident that is taking place in the face of the police, like two people fighting and you know whatever issue, and the police can arrest and charge. If the police arrive on the scene subsequently, then they must conduct an investigation.
Correct. You are correct, but I think based on the sentiments of some in Grenada, there is the perception. Again, it is a perception. I do not have any empirical data to back that up, but there is the perception that law enforcement doesn't necessarily respond as quickly to certain crimes or to certain incidents in the way that they responded to the incident in Fort Judy, in spite of the fact that they have to be allowed the latitude to conduct their investigations before.
Well, yes, and as I say, you may have certain isolated issues. I know, for example, there is the complaint with regard to the police that you may call them on issues and they take long to respond. That's a problem. Then the police might tell you, listen, we don't have transport or whatever issue. They may respond to certain complaints faster than the other, and that's why I say
marijuana complaint, for example, Mr. Ferguson.
Sorry,
such as marijuana complaints.
Well, again, I mean, I wouldn't isolate any particular example. As I say, you would find that, but I do not think that it would be fair to characterize the police as being partisan and deliberately taken. They might be slow on doing certain things. But remember that when the police institute a charge, it's being determined not in the court of public opinion, but in a court of law. There is an institution, there is a court of law, and it is the onus on the police, not on the accused. The onus is on the police to prove the case against the accused and to prove it beyond reasonable doubt. So that we have to appreciate that, and therefore it is not a situation where one says arrest, don't investigate properly, and then when you come in court, they make a mess of the case, and then what you have, the police getting blamed for it too. So I'm saying one has to look at that aspect of it. What I'm hearing, I heard a bit of the commissioner's press conference that a medical form was issued, and that is usually the case in an instances where there is harm. You issue a medical form to determine degree of harm to charge for, whether it's assault, in which case you don't even need to have harm at all, whether it's assault, whether it's just simple causing harm, causing grievous harm, maiming, dangerous harm. There are these different degrees of harm. So what the police are saying is that, listen, it's not we didn't intend to do anything. We issued a medical form, which is the normal procedure. The person brings back the medical form, and then based on the medical form, you lay a charge. And they say, listen, there was every intention to do so. But where the problem came in, Kellon, is the issue of communication. Did the police officer really and truly say to the lady that this is a private matter and therefore you should deal with it yourself. That would normally cause outrage in individuals.
Correct. And at this point, I would want to bring in Cassandra Mitchell. Cassandra, welcome to the stream again. Now, you were one of the organizers, in addition to Mr. Pancho and I believe Michelle Alexander, who organized that protest. Can you tell us what the genesis was? What was that triggering point, if you will, to enable you to mobilize that protest in such short order?
Mr. Ruggles is correct in stating that initially the whole objective of the protest was not racially based. When I looked at the clipping on GBN and MTV, I think that was the Friday evening, I was bothered by the fact that the wife of the victim was saying that the officer told her, or well, told the victim that it's a private matter. And so the whole objective was to stand in solidarity with the family and to call for justice. Because like Mr. Ruggles said, Mr. Ferguson said, it's not supposed to be a private matter. If you look at the facts surrounding the case, then this is a criminal matter. So whether or not the police officer said that to her, whether there was some miscommunication is still being questioned. I listened to the press conference with the Commissioner of Police, and he didn't necessarily deny or confirm that that was said or not said to her. So there must have been maybe some miscommunication. It could have been a new recruit. It could have been an officer who misunderstood the process. Because I look at facts. We're in a pandemic. You have a lot of new recruits who are out intermingling with officers who are more experienced, and it could have just been a misunderstanding. But that is what triggered the initial. That was the whole objective of the march, to speak for injustice, and not just for Mr. Smith. And I keep saying to people, this was more than just about him. This was about the many people who tried to get justice in the system, the Grenadians who tried to get justice and felt that the system failed them. And we were just frustrated, enough is enough. And I looked at the clipping, and I felt so emotional, like it was my father or my brother trying to present his case, and he couldn't, because when you look at Mr. Smith, and you can see that he felt emasculated. His wife felt like, there was no justice. How can the police tell me that this is a private matter? And that is what triggered the discussion between Michelle and I. And we decided, you know what, we are going to stand with that family until they get justice, until something is done. So while one cannot take on the issue of race, because when you look at the individuals involved, you have a Caucasian family being questioned as perpetrators, and then you have obviously a Black family who are victims of what we call injustice in the system. So we are, at this point, we are waiting to see what is going to become of this. We are still standing in solidarity with the family. Too many individuals have been through this, where we felt that the police didn't handle the situation correctly, where we felt that the system didn't offer us justice. And that was the motive, the initial objective behind the protest. And I'm looking at individuals standing in the spotlight, and I have to say this, and I'm seeing so many twisted objectives and scenarios on social media. But as the initial planners of the protest, it was not about race initially. You can't take it out because obviously it is a Caucasian family, it is a Black family who are involved. But the whole objective was just to stand in solidarity with a Black man who felt emasculated, who was abused based on information we had then by a Caucasian family. And we felt that the police did not handle the situation properly. So we decided, you know what, we're going to stand up.
Yes, I'm going to bring in Joanna now, and I will be posing the question. And that common thread surrounds due process rights and the inequality in the application of justice. Both of you work in the activist space, right? And Joanna, I will begin with you. Anything resonates with that?
I am very sorry, Callan, but I did not hear you clearly. But I mean, in terms of what Mr. Ferguson would have said, what Miss Michelle would have said, I do recognize similarities in terms of the issues with the issues in terms of the discourse surrounding these separate incidents in these two different islands, but with similarities in terms of the languaging surrounding the situation, surrounding the optics, as well as identity playing off here. Commissioner Gary Griffith stated that the uprisings were a plot to destabilize the country by criminal elements and gangs. I was present at one of the protests organized by the community, and I saw residents, I saw mothers calling for justice. I heard a particular mother map her street and said this person was murdered here by the police. Nothing happened. Lower down by the corner, a person there was murdered. Her son was murdered, and there was no justice there. Nothing came out of the investigation. And lower down the street, when you go up the hill, there was another murder there, right? And so she mapped those incidents taking place within the context of this conversation. And there were statements, jail make for you and me. One of the residents went up in a police officer face and say that, right? So it's just basically, asserting that the justice that I could face is the same justice that you need to face if you do something wrong. And I think Keith Rowley, Prime Minister Keith Rowley, in referring, to the youths with the guns being the problem, and his dedication of the 5-person team to the recovery efforts, without cautioning Commissioner Gary Griffith against his brutal use of force, as well as his dehumanizing language against the people, and then also without demanding that the officers involved in the shooting being suspended pending the investigation, is ignoring the people and is taken away from what is the problem at hand and what the people are uprising for.
Cassandra, does what Joanna said resonate with you in any way?
Oh yeah, yes it does. And one has to be mindful because I'm looking at what is happening.
Yeah, the contexts are different.
Yes, because I'm looking at what's happening in Grenada, and I pay a lot of attention to social media because that is where it all started. And I keep saying to my peers that we need to be mindful that the initial objective of the protest, of us standing in solidarity with the Evans, with the Smith family, doesn't get lost because there's so many other scenarios coming out. Different individuals want to stand and twist the objective, and that is not what it was initially about. We are just saying that for years there has been too many injustices in the system. We as young people, we as Grenadians feel that the system has failed us, and I think it's just a combination of pent-up frustration, not just with the Evan Smith issue, but with many others who have similar experiences. And yes, no one may question whether or not the issue of it is a private matter was said to the victim. There are other individuals who had different experiences who are saying, you know what, I had a case with the police, and when it should have been a criminal charge, they left me there, and I didn't feel like if I get justice. So this is what we are trying to fight for. We are trying to say, you know what, we need justice. We not just from the police. And I'm hopefully, and I said this to Commissioner Martin, I'm hoping that this protest and us standing up is a message to the RGPF. You know what, we know that you're not perfect, but we hope that this is an opportunity for you to look at where your weaknesses are and to maybe retrain some of your officers, pull some of them off the street, because just there are way too many stories. And again, the issue of racism, I'm seeing it being played in the media. Yes, you cannot take that away from the conversation. The issue of classism and elitism in Grenada, we can't move away from it, because I'm looking at the facts that's coming into the case, not the allegations, but the facts. And these issues do play a role, apparently, in what transpired. And then I'm hearing so many other stories similar to this, and we can't move away from this. So hopefully this is an opportunity for all stakeholders involved to come meet at some discussion table and see how we can solve this. We can put solutions moving forward and prevent this from happening again, because people are really, really frustrated with the system. We are tired of the injustices. We are tired of the corruption. We are tired of the classism. We want equal rights. And that is the objective of the protest. That is why we are standing in solidarity with the Smith. Justice for them, justice for those who didn't get justice in the past, and for those who may want to go through the system, get justice in the future.
Cassandra, my question is, now you suggested that you offered ideas to the commissioner, Mr. Martin, with respect to offering your services as working within the nonprofit sector. What was his response, and what specific actionable plans do you think can be put in place to ensure that law enforcement would be mindful of some of these concerns that you're raising?
I wonder if Edwin wants me to speak about this, but when he was initially appointed commissioner of police, I had a discussion with him about bringing civil society together, especially with new recruits and the police officers who have been in the force for years, so they understand the issue, because we are the grassroots organizations, we are on the ground, we are the ones that the victims come to when they feel that they don't get justice. We are the ones that they come to when they want counseling, when they're seeking help, when they're looking for legal support. And I suggested that maybe when you're doing your training with officers coming into the RGPF, that you can get different segments of the grassroots community, civil society, to have discussions with them. LGBTQ is an issue I know that that I've been advocating for. I've had so many cases where people from that community go to the police and they don't feel that they get justice. They're laughed at, they're ridiculed. I suggested that you bring maybe someone from Grenchap or some other organization, and you have them talk to the police so you can raise awareness and they be mindful that while you may not necessarily support their lifestyle, that they too have human rights. They have the right and access to get access to justice. He did welcome the idea. I have not seen it. I don't know about my other the other members of civil society. I have not seen it happen. And I know you have this pandemic that has delayed so many other things with civil society. And one of the things he did tell me that he wanted to do prior to the pandemic was to go out to communities to kind of get a sense as to what their needs are and their frustrations are with the RGPF. So I did have that discussion with him. I don't know where, especially in light of all that is happening, where this is going to go moving forward. But the suggestion is still on the table. There needs to be a merger. Grassroots organizations, we are the ones who are on the ground. We are the ones who have to deal with a lot of the social ills. And I think it is very, very, very crucial that we bridge the gap between the RGPF and the communities, because it's widening. And while the RGPF may have a differing view, I see a big gap between how the community perceives the police and how the police perceive the community.
A very good point. Joanna, quickly, Cassandra indicated that there have been overtures made to work with the police force in Grenada. What is your organization doing to bridge the gap? Obviously, the situation in Trinidad is much different, significantly different. The dynamics are also different.
In terms of the work that Womandra has been doing with the police, we actually have a working relationship with the commissioner of the gender-based violence unit that has been established, and we have also done outreach in terms of the recent sexual offences unit that was established. So we do have some level of rapport with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service through the organization Womandra. However, what we are finding is that there seems to be a limit in terms of how far or how effective the work with CSOs can actually be. And that is what we have been pushing against. Because we in civil society, we give our life, blood, sweat, tears, time, everything towards reaching a state where everyone is equal. That's what we want. We want equal rights and justice. And we think that we could get there. And then there are amount of people at different levels, at different spaces, who contribute different things in terms of research, in terms of being able to reach out to their communities. And that's the work that we've been doing, also collaborating with other organizations. But the mindset is that this situation could only be helped to a certain extent. So that greatly limits the work that we do. But we continue to push forward. And I mean, we have election that was called. It's called on August the 10th. So I suspect that there's going to be some more pushing forward of the boundaries with regards to equal rights and justice from our local civil society organization.
Electioneering overtures on the part of the PNM and the UNC, right?
Exactly.
Okay, folks, we will take a break. and we will be right back to wrap up. Panelists, thank you, and stay put.
Capitalism there now disguises the racism through classism. And Trinidad and Tobago, a society with so many unconscious African people, will say, oh, it's not about race. Because look, there are black people over there mixing with the whites, and there are black people over here mixing with the Chinese and with the Indians. So because we see some degree of social intermixing on a casual level, we say racism doesn't exist, but we ignore the fact that there is an institutionalized systemic racism that runs through the economics and financial institutions of the society that manifests later on in land ownership, business entrepreneurship, and the granting of mega multi-million dollar contracts. That part is not discussed. So the justice system needs to be properly corrected.
And welcome back. Before we go back to our guests, we will entertain some comments that are coming in. Kipling Francis says quite a few police are not there because of ability, but because of loyalty. So don't blame them. And then Robert Ortiz says, very well said, Ms. Mitchell. Our police officers are in desperate need of continuing education and training. Ken Lewis says, when the government shows its hand by its own CARICOM ambassador working out of Peter David of the Minister of Foreign Affairs office defending two, I guess he's trying to say two aggressors, a clear message is being sent that the state that historically defended slavers and later white privilege is still playing the same role in 2020. And then we have some other comments here. Leo Lenny Edwards says, we need to value all Grenadians from the north and to the south, the rich and the poor, the able and those that are differently abled, all Grenadians, including LGBT Grenadians. And Rod Charles, we have different experiences with the COP. I'm aware he speaks to many people, but there is little evidence that he acts on the feedback he receives. Interesting, Cassandra. You have your work cut out there for you to ensure that there is follow-up to a lot of the suggestions you are making. But we would conclude the show. I want to get some final thoughts and sentiments around this issue. There's been a lot of debate around race and class, both in Grenada and in Trinidad. Obviously, in Trinidad, it is much more pronounced because of the racial diversity of Trinidad and Tobago. But this is a general question to everyone. Are race and class issues still prevalent in Grenada and in other former British colonies? And do you see this being played out in the conduct of due process? Ruggles, I was talking to you.
Yes, well, class will always be an issue, probably in the Grenada context. Race would less be an issue. However, it is important, Kellon, that we learn the lessons out of all these experiences and ensure that we as a people emerge stronger, more united, that our institutions are better able to serve us. And Cassandra, made some very important points. And it starts off with education, training, engagement. The police can't do their job effectively on their own. And civil society plays an extremely important role. And when civil society reaches out to you to assist, that is a hand that you need to clasp and embrace because you need the people to do your work effectively. Once you have a situation, and it's a worrying situation in Trinidad, for example, that you have the police and the people fighting constantly, there are all these confrontations, and the use of force will only make matters worse. the use of force, there will be casualties and more casualties. You have to go to the underlying issues when you have these problems. And for some of these depressed communities, for years, they have been suffering. And at some point, there is going to be an explosion. In Grenada, in relation to the incidents, you know, many people have their different kinds of experiences with the police. And it is important that the police themselves are sensitive when doing particular investigations, that they communicate well, and that people, based on what they say, not on the basis of a uniform or on basis of power, but on the basis of, you know, ensuring that people feel a sense of justice. So, for example, if on the scene there are angry people, obviously angry because there's an incident that has just played out, then you try to calm the waters and ensure that even if you can't do what they demand there and then, but you communicate with them in a way that they would feel that, listen, rest assured that this matter would be followed up. You take your medical form, what is medical form, and come back to the station. We take a statement from you and take it from there. Many people, the other side of it too, it shows the importance of public education and public legal education on certain basic things, including rights. The distinction, for example, between a civil and a criminal matter. And as I always say, that out of every criminal matter, there can be a civil matter. In a criminal matter, that is where the police become involved, and merely the victim in the police matter is merely a witness in the matter. It's not their matter. It's the police matter, and the victim is a witness. However, and the objective of the criminal law is punishment. Out of that same matter, an individual may wish to pursue it privately by way of the civil route to get compensation. So, for example, somebody beat me up. Apart from the police handling it and laying criminal charges, being offenses against the state. And that's why with the charge sheets, when you read them, what you will see, Commissioner of Police versus the accused. Not the name of the private individual. Commissioner of Police versus the accused. In the private civil matter now, the same incident, you are then going to the court to say, listen, I was assaulted and battered, and I want compensation for that. That is a private matter. And sometimes there either the police get involved in civil matters that they ought not to get involved in. So somebody, the tenant giving problems, and they want to get the tenant out and they call the police. That's not a police matter. That's a civil matter. However, if there's a breach of the peace, somebody causes harm to somebody, then that's a criminal matter. So it's important to understand these distinctions. And it's important too that police officers are sensitive. Sometimes, you know, you can have a big explosion in the city. And you know why? Just because of the attitude of a police officer in dealing with the situation. Instead of calming it, it inflames it. And that is where training becomes so important. The police must do they need to do the job working together with other institutions, and civil society is an important institution. People have a right to protest, of course, and I think one of what the organizers ought to be commended for ensuring that the protest is a peaceful protest. And what I will say too is that now persons have been charged. The matter is in the hands of the court. You know, I noted, for example, other people made contrary statements and public statements, and everybody, so people automatically now take a side, right? Everybody take a side, and everybody beating the other side. At the end of the day, it will be determined in the court that aspect of it will be determined in the court. All the opportunity will be given to all sides to say their story, and the court will rule accordingly. Everybody, whether it's the white man or the black man, everybody is entitled to due process. Everybody charged. Each person is entitled to an attorney. An attorney has a duty to represent individuals and bring forward the best defense. And that's why lawyers frequently, when they get involved in matters that there might be a killing, a sensational killing, and the lawyer is representing the accused, and the public comes down against the lawyer, the accused. That is the system. And that's what makes the system work. Because everybody, no matter how heinous your crime may be, you are entitled to due process. You are entitled to representation. So don't be the lawyer. Don't beat the lawyer, and don't say that the accused ought not to be entitled to due process. Everybody. And I agree fully that everybody ought to be treated equally and with respect. And I think out of this incident, the police need to take stock. We need to do more public education. Organizations or institutions like the civil society organizations that Cassandra is involved in, these play an important role in society, because you know when these things happen and people can't speak for themselves because they are up against the state, they are up against a system. And that's why you need activists to ensure that they can rally around individuals and support individuals.
So you need activists, very important. And I think this piece is critical. But I would get to Cassandra for some final comments, and then Joanna. Cassandra.
Well, I want to first start by supporting Mr. Ferguson's comment about everybody needs access to equal justice. And again, I emphasize that was the initial objective of the protest, in that many don't feel that we are being treated, especially Grenadians, that we are being treated equally. We are seeing too many cases of privilege, classism, elitism in the system. And we are hoping that out of this Smith situation, that all of the stakeholders involved, our policy makers, the judicial system, CSOs, people on the ground, understand or take something positive from this, and that we look and we come together and we try to create some sort of solution, because we have had enough, and especially young people, and I speak for youth, we are frustrated. We have too many cases where we don't feel that we are being treated equally, and we will continue to stand up in solidarity with the Smith and with anyone who feels that they had some sort of injustice in the system. I continue to work with the police. I understand that they're not perfect, and I'm hoping that out of this, Commissioner Martin, as the head of the organization, takes some positive. And like I said to him this morning, he needs to act quickly, do what needs to be done. There are some very tough decisions that needs to be made. I'm calling publicly now on the Minister of National Security. We're not hearing you. Yes, we understand that the police have to do their job, but we need to be assured by you as our Minister of National Security that this is going to be handled properly, and that we are going to get justice from this, because we still have so many questions that are left unanswered as the facts continue to roll in into this case. We are wondering what is happening in Grenada, and I'm begging people to be calm. You have a right to protest, but we are also begging the system for solutions. Enough is enough. I said it years ago in 2012, 2013, that Grenada is a ticking time bomb, and the bombs are young people, and what you're seeing unfolding before you are those bombs. They're going to explode if something isn't done. So we are begging the Minister of National Security, say something, assure the people that we are going to get justice, that certain things are going to be real. Look, I'm calling on Commissioner Martin. You have to take a look at your organization and make some very tough decisions, whatever they may be. I trust you. I've said that to you. I believe and I trust in your judgment. And it's now time for you to show us, the taxpayers, that we are getting our money's worth. So
All
you
right.
still have my support.
Thank you so much. Joanna, finally.
The situation in Grenada. The problem here is also that we have groups of poor Black people from geographies that are labeled as hotspots, not receiving the correct treatment and access to justice as other communities. And we are noticing that the rhetoric of the state officials have been equally divisive and playing up on these differences, but just framing it as, the law-abiding citizen versus the criminals, versus the gangs, versus the cockroaches, the vermin. And I mean, in terms of our situation, we have the Commissioner of Police, Guy Griffith, stating that he has a country to defend. And my question to that is, from who? Because what I saw was that the police were attacking a unified group of young, poor Black people from these hotspot communities, these underserved communities, people who are neglected and are desperately trying to have their voices heard. So, I mean, it is the role, of the civil society organizations, of the activists to really band together. So in terms of that comment that Ferguson was making, Mr. Ferguson, to band together with the communities. And we really need to, push back against this rhetoric and really change the narrative, because that is not what is happening. That is not what I saw on the ground when I attended one of the protests. And that is not what I'm seeing in the lives. That's not what I'm hearing from the communities.
All right. Panel, thank you so much. I think this was a very important discussion. One of the things that I try to do as a journalist, as a communication scholar, is to give proper context and to give proper nuance to a lot of the issues and events that are occurring in our societies. Because I think that is one of the things that tends to be missing, that nuance, right, in these discussions. And so I trust that our viewing audience would have been able to learn something from this discussion, and that we would move forward with some very good, not only talking points and rhetoric, but with some very good pieces for understanding what due process is like, what justice is like, the deficiencies in the system that needs to be addressed. And so,
yes. Ron, if you may allow me, or probably if I take the liberty on behalf of the panel, to commend you for your program, not just inviting us to the program, but for programs such as these, because
yes,
things that we overlook. And I constantly preach it. I've been preaching it for the last 20 years, involving public legal education. Really, empowerment is via education. And we need to educate our communities. We need to engage our communities. We need to have discussions, present various perspectives and debate. And I think what your forum allows is precisely that to happen. And I know it's not an easy task. And in the spirit of George Grant, I think you are continuing a very important tradition to have these programs going, and I would urge you to keep it up.
Thank you so much for that. Joanna, thank you so much. Cassandra, thank you. Thank you all for appearing this morning, Ruggles, and certainly that is something that, again, in the spirit of George Grant, he was one of my mentors, and is somebody that I have deep and great respect for. So we are over time, but I think this discussion was necessary today. Thank you again, folks. Our panelists, stay right there. We would have our green room discussion once we end the program. This has been another edition of the Bub Report. Happy Sunday to everyone.